I did
And
what I was
go.
told, John. I pushed the record button. Now we can carry on our conversation, just rewind a couple of questions.
Yeah,
So,
go for it.
um, systems thinking and ecological thinking, they are very similar, but systems thinking, when I see them
Would it be
online,
ecological thinking?
well, no, this is what I mean. Like when I look online, there is systems thinking,
Mm.
but then there's the ecological approach. But the ecological approach is embedded within dynamical systems theory,
Which
which
is part of systems thinking, which kind
exactly.
of basically makes it almost a moot point because that's the thing. It feels almost because I've been doing this myself as I've been going through my website. I'm trying to remove all of the best phrase, the ecologically
Invalid?
invalid, muddy words that exist. So stuff like busy brained, which was just a marketing version of neurodiverse without saying neurodiverse. And I'm like, how do I describe busy brained in a way that is ecologically valid? Because yeah,
Chaotic.
that's been yeah, chaotic. Yeah, chaotic.
Because that's a nod to chaos theory, which is obviously
Yeah,
embedded within complexity and dynamical systems.
exactly.
Yeah, so rolling backwards to my rolling forwards and backwards because time is
Non-linear.
um, yeah. To the question about systems thinking, when you think about systems thinking and how to use it or apply it or content you've seen made around it, discussing it, what do you start thinking about?
Chaos theory. I think instantly for me, I start thinking about like that balance between just teetering on the edge of chaos when I think about systems theory. And that's kind of where I jump. Dynamical systems, that approach of things self-organizing, that kind of, it just goes straight to ecological language. So
Interesting.
like for me, it goes straight to ecological language. I suppose I have the components of a system. There are systems within systems. I have all of that kind of thing, but I am almost seeing it through a lens of the ecological approach.
So, when people say they have a systems thinking approach, do you think they're alluding to the relationship between an organism and an environment?
Rarely,
But if they're the same
rarely.
thing and synonymous, surely.
Then maybe they're not the same thing because my relationship with systems thinking. I mean, if we go systems thinking and we really kind of like go a bit deeper and dive deeper away from my own perspective, then systems thinking is all this nonsense about, you know, processing, input, output, that kind of thing. I think systems thinking it's a theory, obviously, duh, that can be looked at. Can it be looked at through both lenses? I'm really struggling to look at it from a cognitive lens. I'm trying. I'm like, eh.
So, I guess I'll give you a little bit of a cue. Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
a cue here, because we can't direct this, blah blah blah. August Bradley's content is based on systems thinking, and
Uh-huh. Sorry, I'm fine.
yeah. So August Bradley's content is related to systems thinking because that's what he builds his notion system from. When I look at that,
Very constrained.
yes, but he doesn't use constrained. He doesn't use affordances. He doesn't use any of those things.
Oh,
And
wow.
there are instructions. There are paths to go down. There are
Yeah.
things to do. There are parts to a system that
Yeah.
builds up the whole of the system.
Mm.
And it's very mechanical in the way that it's explained and described, which is systems thinking. But I wouldn't say that's from an ecological approach.
No, no, it's definitely not. We could explain it from an ecological approach, but it's not an ecological approach.
Precisely. Which is where I'm finding a little bit of conflict between the Obsidian PKM talking about systems thinking space and the ecological approach. Because I want to say they are the same thing, or they are alluding to the same theories and ideas, which they are. Connectedness, non-linearity, all of those sort of like buzzwords that you'd throw in there, great. But when I'm looking at the experiences and the practices people are doing and the way that they're explaining their theories, I'm not seeing an ecological approach there. I feel that the relationship between the organism and environment, the habitats, the niches, they are lost
Mm,
in preference to parts and wholes.
yeah.
I feel the
They're
way
like kind
system,
of oversimplified. It's kind of to the point where it's just like, oh, this is a part of a whole. This is a component of a whole. Because I did the component conversation as well, because that was one of the questions. That was, well, what's a system? It's like breaking that down further. With pieces, the pieces that come together.
but are
But
they?
but are they? And it depends on the relationship, because if those pieces don't fit, it kind of goes into the encompassing of like what I do with my business. It's like everyone tries to approach things from system thinking of like, okay, get all your pieces in a row and in a line and constrain the shit out of it, which wouldn't be the language they used, but I'm using that language because I'm riffing. And just put yourself in there and force yourself to do these things, and then everything will be fine, which is ecologically invalid, but it is systems thinking.
That's why I asked the question. That's why I want to talk about it.
Yeah,
Uh,
because that's annoying. Because
I agree, but we can't. We could. I don't want to go around and say I'm not a systems thinker. I'm an ecological thinker, which is obviously
that's
where we.
just one more buzzword that people are going to have to. Because that's one thing I'm really thinking about as I'm kind of building up and going through all of the stuff that I've ever created that I'm going to bring back on the Notion templates, all of my courses, all of my programs, all of the stuff, and I'm going through and like, we can only store 7 to 9 pieces of information. I'm like, it's just that meme of me just
Yeah.
face planting. I'm like, that needs to be just eradicated from Earth.
I imagine you looking back, you're probably recognizing what I saw when we first spoke,
Mhm.
because we've mentioned this a couple of times in past conversation that you were saying, oh, well, I always struggled with fully accepting the traditional approaches
Yeah,
of
I
the way
said
that
that
we,
last week in last week's
yeah,
episode, and
and
now
I'm
I'm looking
like,
at it. No, I didn't. No.
like you
Oh,
were
you
fully in there.
poor, oh, you poor boy. It's really funny though. It's funny to look back.
Well, yeah, exactly, and that's so. I spoke to my head of course yesterday because I was talking to him about lots of different things, and I was chatting with him, and he was. I mean, so he uses the matrix analogy, the red pill, blue pill thing. Obviously, online red pill now means something completely different, but he uses that. You're not familiar?
No.
Red pill is like the toxic masculinity movement. That's what they've dubbed themselves, the red pill
Oh, no.
movement. So like
Okay.
the Andrew Tates of the world, like, oh yeah, we're red pill idiots. Yes, I'm sharing my opinion on their views. Idiots. Yeah. So they are red pill. So
Wow.
when you search them, when you search red pill online, you will likely find the toxic masculinity space, because yeah, it became a popular term because they also like the Matrix metaphor, which is unfortunate.
But
But
anyway,
but yeah, but Jim was saying so. Jim, head of course, he was saying that there are not many people that take the red pill, and some people that do think they've taken the red pill haven't. Which I was like, okay, interesting. And when I finished that conversation, I was invigorated because I love talking with Jim. Both of us are we we do what we're supposed to do. We argue, but we both argue with a rationale and a philosophy behind the points that we make. We don't just spout out random statements and then just can't back any of it up. So it was a really good argument, and we were sort of discussing all these different. I tweeted about this the other day, or I posted about this on X the other day. I had a good argument with my mum because we
I was
argued.
going to ask about that. That just popped into to my thoughts. So I was like, oh, what? Yeah, oh yeah, I remember that.
We'll come back round to that in a second. But the idea that people could think they're taking the red pill, but they're not, was interesting. And on the way home, I was thinking about systems thinking because I'd seen quite a few. It's not systems thinking that they were talking about, but quite a few comments around the ideas from systems thinking. So, I need to get these parts together. And the video that I did about Nick and Tiago, where they were discussing atomic notes, Evernote, Obsidian, those sorts of things. System thinking, even though it wasn't said, was fundamental in their assumptions. And I was looking more when I got home at what atomic notes are, what smart notes are, and all the Zettelkasten ideas. And it's embedded within systems thinking that there are parts that make up wholes. And the
Mm.
explanations are still, oh, we need to connect the parts to make the whole. Yeah, but why do we need to connect them?
Yeah, that has always been my point.
They're
Like,
already connected. You have connected
we
them.
just can't we can't perceive the connections. That's the issue. You can't see the connections.
Can't attune to them.
Attune to. Thank you.
Yeah,
You can't
because we can.
attune to the connections. You. That's all it is. They're connected. No one. They don't need you. Like,
But that's what I'm saying. Like when people describe the system's thinking from Obsidian networked thought tools or Rome, Tana, whatever tool you're talking about, they say, oh, you need to connect the nodes.
why?
Why do you need an application physical connection with the node? Why? Why? Because we, as organisms, are organized, self-organized systems, and we have an ongoing experience of the world, which means anything that we have experienced, i.e., encountered, is connected because we have experienced it. Is the connection good, high, stable, thick, whatever adjective you want to dump on there?
Ick.
Well, I'm thinking like thickness of nodes or the size of things. Yeah, all the like visual graph stuff. I don't use it, but um, whatever adjective you want to put on there, it's already connected because it's part of your experience. So, what is the point of making a digital connection, as in something physically in the environment? Why would you do that if it's already connected through your experience? I'll let you answer that. Actually, I was going to give an answer, but what do you think? Why would you connect something in a physical tool like Obsidian when things are already connected?
I suppose remembering
Yeah,
that would be why I. That's why I do it. I don't
yeah.
connect them like that. I just have them in a messy file and a bunch of messy files that or self-organized, but if I wanted to connect, thinking, back to what it was before, because I remember one of the plugins I installed was like the stupid, like going up one and down one and like
Oh,
connecting.
breadcrumbs.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was. It was something like that. It was to remember that they were connected. And in the end, I just went, well, why am I doing this? I could just put it all on one note and then it's all in one place. And then I'm already doing all of the work in the note and then I don't have to jump between notes. And it's why I stopped using Notion
Yep.
because it was so bare and bare. I was talking to one of my D&D group about this because they're having real problems with like Obsidian crashing. And I'm like, wow, did you get Obsidian crashing? How? Please tell me more. I wish to know.
Yeah, what are they doing?
I don't know. I don't know. I never figured it out. I just haven't had the time this week to sit down with them and go, right, you, me, talk now. So they've gone back. I think they just also like Notion because
Mm,
visually it's not. And I'm like, okay, cool. So how are you? Because D&D is an incredibly loose
mm.
environment. Like it's dynamic. It changes every single second. The one small thing casts ripples, and so
Butterfly.
it's a butterfly indeed. Yeah, they break multiple butterflies' wings or sprites in no, but anyway.
Yeah.
And it's like how would I do it in Notion? Because strictly speaking, I could. It's like, how would I create it in Notion? Okay, well, for one, if I was to use it actively while I'm running the session, that would suck. For one, while I'm playing the session, that would suck. Sometimes with all the plugins I have in Obsidian, it sucks, but most of the time I can get away. But then I'm pointing as if everybody knows. I've got Morgan on the screen, so I can have a little note there if I need it. But I would have it all in one database. But then once you put it all in one database, you then have other problems.
Yeah.
You got to
Because it
try and
adds a constraint.
because in the moment it's in a database, then you're screwed. But if it's not in a database, then you can't do all the nice, lovely data and information and all that lovely stuff. Okay, but you could kind of work around with, a button, or I guess a button would work, and then you could do. But it's like more constraints, more constraints, more constraints, more workarounds, more
The thing
workarounds.
is, you end up, and this is why I asked, like, when it comes to connecting something in an app, when you connect it in an app, if it's a link, well, okay, great. That could be helpful for remembering the thing. But if it's a link, you need to know why you've linked it, which is where the evergreen note ideas come from. You need to grasp why the link is there. It's not just an implicit, oh, yeah, that's linked to this thing. Like learning is linked to teaching. Yeah, but why is it linked to teaching? Why is there a link there? Because that's blatantly obvious. Right? What's the purpose of making the link? When inside of applications, you make the link explicit, well, now you're writing a sentence, or maybe you've written a sentence in the name of the file, but the sentence of the name of the file means you're doing the atomic note thing, which leads to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sentence files. And that adds a lot of parts to the system, which you need to organize, which is a lot of energy and effort, which no, I don't want to do that. So when
No.
I'm making a link in like a tangible link inside of an application, I need to know why it's linked there without adding loads of other information in there because now you have constraints of other things that you could be doing, which in Notion is very easily seen with the databases. You
Mm.
add a file or a page inside of a database, you have limitations with what you can do with that later on, or
Yeah.
you're adding tons of information which takes longer to organize things. So when I'm thinking back to systems thinking, it's almost as if systems thinking, you take the parts and you make them into a whole. But in order to make them a whole, you have to separate those parts. You need to add more parts to it. So instead of it being a file, you now have a database and multiple files. Like, surely that's doing the opposite of what we want to do. Now,
Yeah.
instead of an organism environment relationship, the environment is extremely complex because the amount of parts you've put into it, which to me seems the opposite of what we want to be doing.
Which is why everyone is struggling.
A lot
Like,
of
which is
people, not everyone.
why a lot of people are struggling. Why there are so many people just like, I can't anymore.
But that's where I look at those connections and I sit here and think, okay, if we already have connections because we are already experiencing the information, you mentioned about it helps you remember things.
And also,
Yeah.
those connections, depending on what's happening, change. So what then? Do you disconnect all the other connections or add more like then you've got that. It's like when do you remove a connection? When's a connection disconnected? And if you disconnect that connection, then what happened? If you is that gone? I mean entropy, but still,
Yeah.
like is it gone? Or does it still, and then when you come back, so then you're constantly kind of fiddling and cutting and building new connections and doing all this and doing all that, and you're just working on it all the time, which is when you
That's
have
where I was
that
going.
just the information worker, the information
Mhm.
processor.
Yeah. But that's where I
Um,
was going. Like when you look at a connection, if it's been connected, you need to manage those connections inside of the tool because the tool is in the environment. And the relationship between you and the environment will change because it's dynamic, which means you need to maintain that relationship so that it is useful for your goal-directed behaviors. Which means if you've got, let's just pick an easy round number, 10 maps of content or 10 files with
oh, I
links in.
hate maps of content.
Yeah, 10 files
Do
with
not-
links in, which is what I think they are. Uh, and you've got 10 links in each. That's 100 links you need to manage. That's 100 links just in 10 files. I mean, that adds up quick. When you've got lots of ideas going on, if you're making atomic notes, say, for example, teaching. Oh, okay. Are you teaching 3 to 5 year olds? Are you teaching 5 to 12 year olds? Are you teaching 12 to 15 year olds? Are you teaching 15 to 18 year olds? 18 to 21, 21 plus, 65 plus. Oh, wait, now we have another 10 files, which could be linked to all of those things in the map of content. How do you manage all of that? You don't. But because of the way that you're experiencing the world, you can directly learn and directly remember what's going on. So why do you need to make them in the app? I don't I don't think it
Yeah,
helps with remembering. I think working and experiencing and thinking through ideas and concepts and just living, existing helps you remember.
yeah,
Do you need a
yeah.
link between
Because
files to remember? I don't think so.
I don't really go into my Obsidian to remember.
When
Not
when you hear people say, or previously anyway, I used to hear this quite a lot. Oh, links help with spontaneous thoughts.
it doesn't, does it?
I don't think I have gone into a file, been writing in the file, and have seen a link somewhere else that I put in at some point and gone, oh, I didn't think about that. I'm going to write about this now.
No, I just went, oh yeah, that was the thing I thought about. Okay, cool, let's continue.
See, I haven't even done that. I tell you what I have done. Gone, that's not relevant. Don't need that anymore. I've already written about that. Oh, that's further down. I don't think I've ever gone, oh, I didn't think about this because I had thought about it. As soon as you start working in something and experiencing the file, the relationship between you and the file, organism environment relationship, you then start thinking and attuning to the information that is pertinent to whatever it is that you're writing, which, because you've had experience working with the things before, because if it's written in your Obsidian, for example, if I've written a file about learning, I've experienced it. If I'm now writing in my teaching file, I've experienced the learning. I don't need the learning in the teaching. As I'm
No.
writing and experiencing things, I can go, oh, that relates to this learning theory, or that relates to this thing that I know is in a file. All I need to do is find it, which, oh, you could do through links, yes, but you don't know what you're looking for in the link at the time that you're thinking. You need to search for the words or the terms or something that you can attune to, the information you can attune to in the learning file, which might be the name of the file, might be the name of the heading, might be the source that you got it from. It might be a couple of words in a sentence, but you don't know what it is that you're going to be attuning to. So if you just dump a link in there, all it's going to do is say, hey, thought about this? Yes, great. It doesn't do anything else for me.
Yeah.
Which, when we think about smart notes, atomic notes, Zettelkasten,
Oh, I
building a
hate it.
second
I've
brain,
I've never that whole concept of tiny notes.
but there are loads of intertwined concepts in there that
Mm,
on the surface look useful. But I think it's because they're built on traditional assumptions
yes.
and the fundamentals of systems thinking, where it's parts and a whole,
Oh,
and
yeah.
connecting the parts. Well, you don't need to connect the parts, they are already connected. And that is where the environment and organism relationship, organism environment relation. It sounds weird to say environment organism because I say organism environment, but you would expect environment organism because EO. But anyway, random side tangent there. Um, the the relationship there is obviously existing. It exists
Mm.
because that's what we think. So is it an ecological approach to systems thinking? I don't think that's accurate because systems thinking is embedded within the ecological approach. But the ecological,
I don't know whether it is though. Given what we've just spoken about, it seems to almost be a constraint on how we view it. It's something we're looking through
okay,
because you can
the
look through it from both an ecological lens and the ecological approach seems to be a philosophy,
mhm,
obviously. So maybe like I don't know
but
whether even
but systems thinking
connecting
is
them
also a
makes sense.
philosophy.
Oh, it is, isn't it?
It's also a philosophical
Just
approach
a,
to the
so
way.
it's a philosophy of a philosophy.
That's where I was going. Those people that are discussing systems
Mm.
thinking take a systems thinking approach and they look at systems thinking as a part.
Oh yeah.
That's the way that I would explain it. I would explain that the way that they're describing experiences is systems thinking is a part of the way that you function, the way you work, the way you behave, essentially,
Mm.
which I don't think is accurate. Because systems thinking isn't a part in the way that you behave, it is embedded within the way that you behave. You can't not use systems thinking. And
Yeah.
that's where I think the noun verbed conversation comes in here with the ecological approach. I am a systems thinker. I'm using systems thinking. When are you not using systems thinking? Would be because a lot of the arguments is that I take a systems approach. When do you not take a systems approach?
Yeah, it's not possible. I don't think it's. Is it even possible to not take a systems approach?
That would be
No,
my question. And
no.
yeah, I don't think you can because
I,
systems
yeah.
theory is all encompassing. That's why it's embedded within
Within
the ecological
systems
approach.
theory, you have chaos theory. So even if you are disorganized, it's kind of why I just don't get the anti-planning approach because I'm just like, that doesn't exist.
You are
Like
always organizing. You are
you're
an
always
organism.
organized. Yeah, you are always organizing. And I was having a conversation with a client about this the other day. I'm like, you're not. It's like I hate planning. I'm like, okay, you hate the traditional approach to planning, I guess, but you don't hate because you're. And literally 5 minutes later, they were self-organizing. Like
Yeah.
it was 15 minutes later, they were immediately um attuned to their self-organization.
I love using this reference point because it comes from a theory that's embedded within the traditional approaches. Sweller's cognitive load theory suggests that I'm going to butcher it, so I'm paraphrasing here, but he suggests that everyone organizes information. If a student doesn't understand something, it's not because they don't have the information, it's they're just not
Mm,
competent enough to organize the information. And
mm,
that comes from systems theory. But when I hear people talking about systems thinking, that is something that you do, that you get. It's a skill. And systems thinking as a skill, I don't think holds true to the systems theory and therefore is separate from ecological thinking, the ecological approach, which when applied in practice is where a lot of those buzzwords come from. The buzzwords, the marketing terms, they come from foundations of assumptions, the heuristics, these shortcuts, the oversimplifications of the way that we experience the world.
mm.
And if we're going to add labels to things, which, okay, fine, do it for heuristics, but it's oversimplified and often doesn't help. It's
'Cause
helpful in language and communicating, but yeah.
the thing that I'm finding because I'm rebuilding one of my sales pages at the moment, like literally as a and so it's coming up a lot. It's like, who is this for? Well, the easy answer or the oversimplified answer would be neurodiverse individuals because that's marketing. It's a label. But then I'm like, but it's not just because the approach genuinely can work for everyone because it strips all of the assumptions that we have. And
So, you have a couple of assumptions in there which I want to pull apart, which I find
I,
mildly funny, right?
cool, let's go.
You've got neurodiverse in there, and you're saying, but the ecological approach can be used for everyone. But you're assuming that
And
neurodiverse isn't
neurodiverse
everyone.
people, yes. I mean, that is the shortcut I make. Yes, exactly.
But you're not making it because I don't think that's what you believe.
No, it's not.
So what you're doing is you're using a term that other people may believe. So you
Yes,
are you are perceiving directly other
yes,
people's affordances to the information you're
yes,
sharing, and you are
yes,
manipulating that, which is, I mean, heuristic manipulation is literally what marketing is.
yes.
So you're not being disingenuous by saying neurodiverse, because your meaning of neurodiverse is different to their meaning. Does that mean that you're being disingenuous? No.
No, that's true. Because at the end of it is that. And so what I did put was symptoms of neurodiversity, because that also stands back a little bit from.
No, no. Now that,
Here we go.
now,
Yum,
now
yum,
that I'm
yum,
not so
yum.
sure about.
Yeah, because I wanted to kind of just pull back a little bit. Because yeah, that's very true though. That's actually a really helpful observation. Because I think it's going to be the hardest part for me. Because when I'm talking to people, I've been speaking about this a lot. Because the business world and most of kind of what we do, most of society is baked into the traditional approach. Using the language of I'm noticing as I keep going, because I remember when I first joined, and I think we experienced this last week of like, let's dismiss everything that was said before. But it's kind of almost like, let's use what was said before. Because everything that is said can be, I think, most of what is said can be explained from an ecological approach. It just requires some, well,
Yeah. I think if the terms used aren't indirectly embedded within the traditional approaches, i.e., working memory, then you can explain whatever experience it is through the ecological approach. If someone is saying, I only have 7 to 9 bits of capacity in my memory store, That can't be explained through ecological psychology because it's not what it fundamentally goes against our assumptions. So, no, we can't explain that. Sorry. It's like asking an English person that doesn't speak Chinese to explain something in Chinese. No, I can't do that. I don't understand the language. So that's the way I would look at the marketing element. But again, it comes back to how we communicate as individuals, the language we use. The language we've chosen to use most of the time is embedded within traditional approaches, unless you rephrase and reassess the unsolvable issues, as Jeff and Julia say. And the only way to really do that is to use from a marketing perspective, use the heuristics that many people like leverage and are familiar with. So you're not adding complexity into that environment by adding in terms and jargon. But this is something Jim and I were talking about the other day or yesterday. When talking, those that completely disagree with you will go away.
Yeah,
Those that disagree with you but are intrigued enough may argue, may sit there and point their finger, but they're still listening. They're still
yeah,
probing. They're still trying to work out what's going on. And those are the people that we really want. But as
yeah.
soon as you have words and terms that they're like, oh yeah, see, you're selling out, as it were. You really believe the traditional approaches because you're using that. And they will try and point at things.
Oh yeah,
And they do with me. I haven't found someone that has successfully pointed at me using a traditional term yet. I say yet because there may be something there. And most of the experiences that I have when people point out, oh, that's not right, that's an assumption from traditional approaches in some way, is often them misunderstanding what it is that I'm saying because they're not familiar enough with the terms used, which isn't a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just something that I have observed, which actually gets to our argument point, which we can go on to in a second. But yeah, so when it comes to the marketing of those terms, use those terms because people will be familiar with it. But if you're
mm,
explaining it through an ecological approach, they may bypass the ecological terms you're using because they're not familiar with it. They see affordance, oh yeah, I know what that is. They see constraint, oh yeah, I know what that is. Then when they come and challenge you, you can say, oh, well, in this explanation, I say this, this, and this. What did you mean by that? Like, what do you think I meant by that? And then when they ask you, you can say, oh, no, that's not we believe. That's not our thinking. We think X, Y, Z.
yeah.
And that's where the challenge comes in. They think they know, but they don't.
Yeah, I had that experience with the first course the task taming is very much built from an ecological lens. And that was it's just like the plan, do, calendar, or they put a calendar in that, right? Yeah, sort of, but
Yeah,
but
but
yeah, but now I'm very intrigued by this argument. I'll call it an argument because it's probably the right
yeah.
expression.
How would you describe an argument? If you were to say you had an argument with someone, how
Mm.
would you describe it?
How would I describe an argument? A
Yeah,
difference
why would you choose to use argument over discussion or debate?
to reduce the heat out of it would be my. Why would I choose to use an argument? I don't know. That's a stupid answer. I don't like that answer. It doesn't make sense.
When
I don't. But an argument is a difference of opinion. Is discussing a difference of opinion. So
agreed.
why would I? Well, why would I change that? No, I wouldn't. Cool. There we go.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I think a lot of people assume an argument is heated. Well, yeah, you have differing opinions. So what is a negative argument? What is an argument that's ineffective, that's not beneficial? Now you're looking at the actual experiences of the argument, and I think there are too many people that associate argument with negative connotations. Because what's discourse? Discourse is a discussion typically about nuances of a situation or an experience. It's discourse around something in specific. Whereas to me, an argument is you're trying, like two people are trying to put their points of view across to the other person. Discourse can be two people from the same sides talking about something in more depth. That's the way I see it. So most people online that are talking about something in echo chamber filter bubble sort of things, that's discourse. They are discussing nuances between approaches. Whereas an argument is you have a different approach to me, let's argue about it.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing.
No.
So when I was arguing with my mum, some context here, sewing. Or when you're sewing, uh, how am I going to explain this to people that don't care about sewing? Everyone knows you've got a sewing machine, right? You've got a sewing machine, you put your material through, your fabric through, and you fold over material, and the thread goes through and it connects the two bits of fabric. Yeah. Basic
Yeah.
sewing, right?
Pretty simple. Yeah.
Yeah. I am fairly new to sewing. My mum has done it previously years back. So she has more experience than me and has more expertise in some areas. But what she couldn't understand, when you match up the materials, typically when you're doing a pattern, so when you're following instructions to create a piece of material, to create a garment, so a t-shirt, for example, you will cut the material and you'll cut the material on the lines so it's the right shape. And she's always done pattern work. So when she's lining up the material, the lines have got to be straight. Like the two bits of material have to be completely together, and then you sew the line. But I was making dog's blanket downstairs. I was just practicing. I was cutting up material, and I was making some sort of dog blankets. So I'm cutting up material with scissors that are not very sharp. So there's jaggedy edges. Some bits are longer than others. The material's all over the place. It's really messy. It's not fine particular pattern cutting. It's literally just I need to cut this thing in half and then sew it back together. And the way that I was sewing, it was causing it to pucker. So instead of it being a complete seam, there was like loads of scrunches of material. And I asked my mum, how do I stop this puckering? I can't work it out. And she was saying, you need to line up the material. And I'm like, well, it shouldn't matter if the material's lined up or not. If I'm sewing in a straight line, I'm gonna get a straight line. Doesn't matter if the material and like the material in the end doesn't matter if it's overlapping or not. Wherever I sew, it's going to be a straight line. And where we disagreed is that she, because of her experiences, she was explaining it through a traditional approach in that no, those two ends need to be lined up. No, that's a feature. That's something you can observe. It's a piece of information you've observed. It's an instruction that you follow. But that's not an affordance in the environment. That's a piece of indirect information that she has learned through her teaching. You need to line up the ends to get a straight line. But that's not true. You can get a straight line without lining up the ends. And that to me is where I was looking at the affordances of the environment and I'm thinking, well, I don't need that to be lined up. What I do need is something else. But there was something else in the environment happening that I couldn't identify. But she didn't know what I was looking for because she's just thinking, well, you just got to line up the ends. But
Mm.
it's not the lining up of the ends that's the issue. It's something else. And we went backwards and forwards with this, and she just couldn't get there. And she went downstairs, she had some other stuff to do, and I carried on. And what it came down to was actually the tension on the machine. So it's not like a hey, I was right, you were wrong thing. It's the way that she had learnt to do the thing, to sew straight lines, she was focused on indirect pieces of information that she had stored and remembered. No, she had this indirect relationship with the environment and she was following cues and instruction rather than her own expertise in the environment, which meant that she couldn't adapt to the changing environment, which is what developing skills should be about. Skill development. Can you adapt to changing environments or do you have to adjust your skill? She couldn't adjust the skill because she was taught indirectly. Oh no, those lines have to be together. No, they don't. No, they don't. You can adjust the skill. But because she couldn't understand why, she couldn't get to the root of the problem, which, as I mentioned, was the tension on the machine. So that if anyone's interested, the tension in the machine basically determines how hard the needle goes down. This is my understanding, how hard the needle goes down. If it goes down too far, then it can pull the material in. So when it comes out, you then get a pucker of the material, which goes all the way through.
This is
And
what happened to you. Yeah.
yeah, that's what happened. And I found that out because I explored the environment. I made loads of sewing lines. I lined things up crooked, jagged, stretched it, pushed it. I did all the things I could think about, all the affordances that I could perceive, opportunities for behavior that I could perceive in that environment. I did, and it still puckered.
Mm.
But my mum was adamant, no, it's because your material's not straight. And that to me is where the argument was beneficial And it
Mm.
was enlightening for me to see a traditional approach, like a skill taught through a traditional approach, being detrimental to the goal because she couldn't figure out what was going on. And even when I showed her, oh no, it's the machine, I had to show her why and how it was the machine before she accepted it. Because she's so ingrained in, no, this is how sewing works. This is how you sew, which is a
Yeah.
skill. And if we're teaching anyone like that, you need to follow these instructions, these rules. This is the cue that you need to attune to. No, it's not a cue you need to attune to. There are affordances, and you can strain the environment so that you can do X skill or whatever, but you need to be able to adjust that skill when things
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
Have you seen any of that sort of have you experienced any of those arguments?
Yes. Yeah. A lot of what Carl, who's been on the podcast before, experience. It's a lot of that. It's a lot of like, it must be done this way. I'm like, why? It's always the first question I ask. Because I'm like, yeah, but there's this and this and that. Like when I was learning guitar as well, I was always told how I had to learn my scales first before I even moved on to chords. When I was taught guitar, it was very much I have to learn the scales. Well, unless you learn your scales, you don't know how to create the chords. I'm like, yeah, I do. Here, here, here. What? No, no. The goal to me was to be able to play the songs that I wanted to play. So I learnt the chords.
I find it interesting when we talk about fundamentals
Mm,
because most people, when they talk about fundamentals, they're not actually talking about fundamentals. That what I find is that they isolate skills
mm,
and they
mm,
teach those things, but those skills are often extremely isolated. And isolated skills, if you were to ask when okay, I'll share some experiences. When I asked coaches, or previously when I asked coaches, would you teach skills in isolation only? Most coaches said no. I don't think I actually experienced a coach that said yes. They would say, oh no, you need to actually apply it to the game afterwards. I'm like, right, okay. So when you're teaching the fundamentals, they're isolated skills. Why not teach them in the game? And I, well, no, because they need to learn the fundamentals first. Yeah, but the fundamentals of what? Because if you take a skill, kicking football, well, that is a skill which has fundamentals in it. Oh, so you now need to swing your leg. Yes, okay. So now you need to get them standing on one leg, swinging their leg. Well, no, because there's a fundamental skill to that, balancing on one leg. So now you need to get kids standing on one leg so they can pass a football. Well, no, because now they need to be able to stand on two legs before they can stand on one. And you're like, so where does the fundamentals go? The fundamentals will go all the way back down to you exist. Like, great. Yeah, I know
How do
that,
I
duh.
exist? Teach me, coach. But that's
As
also
soon
a
as you're
thing with
born, you exist. Like that's the fundamental thing. The fundamental
yeah.
is you exist. Great.
Yeah,
Why
that
do you
was
need to
exactly
narrow it
the
down?
experience with like teaching guitar. When I talk, now I understand everything. It's so interesting now that I've, taken the bright red pill. Now I've taken it. Now I understand and have that much. I have a greater understanding of
You've
what
put your glasses on.
I
Ecological
have.
lens. Yeah, there
I've
you
put
go.
my glasses on. There you go. Yeah, I've put my glasses on. I can see it now. I'm like, oh, that's why. I am such a good teacher. Why people loved my lessons when I taught guitar. Because I wasn't just teaching fundamentals. I was not isolating a skill. I was teaching fundamentals through playing the darn guitar.
Right. I've been watching. Right.
Okay,
I've been
right
watching
then.
a lot of documentaries about sports coaches
Mm,
recently
mm,
because I've been intrigued to see what the experts have done. So, Jose Mourinho, the USA women's football coach, something Mills, I can't remember her first name, but yeah, her as well. A couple of basketball coaches, Pep Guardiola, like all of the big sporting names like basketball, American football, soccer, actual football, the big coaches, and looking at them at what they're talking about. Most people, when they discuss these high level, high performance coaches, talk about their drills and their techniques. But when you listen to them speak, they speak ecologically. Like
mm.
Mourinho says, I just get them playing the game. I don't coach them how to play football. I help them how to play the game. Mourinho talks about it. Guardiola talks about it a lot, and something else a lot. And he was saying that he doesn't coach his team. He doesn't coach individuals. He coaches his team, and he doesn't just coach his team. He coaches his squad. But he doesn't just coach his squad. He coaches the club. And I'm
Mm.
like, right. So your job is coaching the club. And he was saying that he would much rather build up relationships in a club than get one player to do well. And I'm like, yes, obviously. And so many coaches hear that, but then they go and drill things. And when I say drill, I'm saying isolated practices to focus on techniques, and that's their directed goal. Their goal, the coach's goal, is to get the person to learn something that they can reproduce uh, again and again. And that's what their drilling is. But when you look at what the high performance coaches do, the drills aren't really drills in the
No.
traditional sense, where highly constrained skills. They are constrained, but they're certainly not highly constrained, and they don't isolate individual skills. They are pretty open and they're very representative of, yet we still need to teach the fundamentals. I'm like, yeah, but the high performance coaches don't do that. And the argument I get, or the argument I see, is yeah, but they're coaching good players. How do you think they got good in the first place?
That doesn't
They
even
play.
make any sense.
The argument is, oh yeah, Mourinho was coaching Messi. That's why he was good. Then he goes to another club and does it with another club. Then goes to another one, and does it with another one. So it's not just the players are good. It's the his coaching philosophy works. Same with
Mm.
Mourinho. Love him or hate him, it works. Are they different? Tactically, Mourinho and Guardiola are extremely different in the way that they play football tactically and the skills that they develop and their approach to interacting with individuals is slightly different, but it's all built on ecological assumptions,
Mm.
whether they know it or whether they don't. But it works. And you're sitting here, I'm sitting here thinking, well, they're doing this shit, they're just not talking about it. And then all the other coaches are saying, no, 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 technocratic, didactic, you need to do that. Fish slap, go away. Yeah. So, John, when it comes to the ecological approach and systems thinking,
Mm.
coming full circle, how would you address it? Address the situation?
How would I address the situation?
Because I see systems thinking as a red herring.
I don't know. I think my instant thought is I almost wouldn't. I
You
kind
wouldn't
of
address the red herring.
no. I just wouldn't for my own stuff. I would just go from ecological. There will be aspects of systems thinking in there, yes, but for me, the kind of
Why
the
wouldn't you
ecological
challenge
approach.
something? Why wouldn't you challenge something?
How would I challenge something? If you're asking about how I would challenge it, I must have misinterpreted your
Oh,
question.
you said you wouldn't challenge systems thinking. You would just focus on your own work. Totally valid. Totally get that.
Eh,
But why wouldn't you challenge something that is different? Because you are challenging traditional assumptions.
true. Why wouldn't I challenge it? In my business, I suppose I was also thinking business, perhaps. That might be why I am challenging it. Like if I think about what I'm actually doing, I am always challenging it because repeat the question.
Okay, well, the original
Oh,
question was, how would you address systems thinking?
how would I address systems thinking?
I didn't say
And not then,
challenge.
yeah.
I didn't say
Cool.
challenge because I don't think it's a right and wrong. I say
Yeah.
address because I think it's a case of reframing.
I think I would start with it's not just parts of a whole, and a lot of it is self-organizing. Like it's a lot less effort than we think it is. That's kind of how I would start the approach. It's a lot less, it requires less effort than we think it does.
What's it?
Than building systems and thinking in systems and working with systems and systems in itself. We just the thinking part, it's kind of almost obvious that we think. So like if we think of systems on its we overthink it and overcomplicate it and just make it way harder than it actually is because we are naturally self-organizing. We just self-organize. All we need to do is attune to the systems that already exist. It's kind of like, oh, did you know there's air? That's how I kind of see it almost. It's like there's air, we breathe. I'm like, yes, okay, we breathe. Good, excellent, thank you. I
Yeah.
think that's kind of how I would approach it. It's like systems are, they exist. When we start going systems thinking in the traditional approach, we're starting to add just pieces and parts and clanking with it all and messing around with it. And in the end, we're just making it so much more work. It's just so much, we're exerting more effort to try and get it to do things. We assume we need to be part of that when it already kind of is a thing.
I'm curious then. So when it comes to systems, do you think systems thinking is a, I guess, constrained approach to using systems theory?
I think, yeah, yes, I think it is. It makes a whole bunch. It's constrained by the assumptions, and a lot of the assumptions of systems thinking is that we need to be thinking, like we need to be always in it and organizing it and poking it and prodding it. If we go back to
You know what? I reckon inside because I'm trying to think about something that when people have spoken about systems thinking, they don't seem to treat parts as organisms, like
no.
self-autonomous parts. The parts are always,
They also need tinkering.
yeah,
Everything needs to be tinkered with. We the almighty beings from above who know everything because we are more complex than everybody else.
BS.
I know. Have to come in and make those parts work and make those pieces work. And even if we do believe that there are pieces within pieces and systems within systems, they all require us, the almighty beings, to fix because there's always something wrong with them.
Hmm.
And so it's very much like tweak, 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 tweak. Oh, you got to make sure you make those things atomic. Yeah, atomic height. That's too big. That's why you're overwhelmed. Make it smaller so there are more pieces, because then you won't be so overwhelmed.
By the size of the thing, but you'll be overwhelmed by the amount of effort it is to maintain all of the new things. Oh dear. Yes. Yeah, I agree. But when I look at systems thinking and trying to trying to remember any example really where there is some self-organized part, some autonomous part to an example used, I can't think of one. Most of
No.
the time it is person being in charge of system and running
Mm,
it, and the system being a machine.
mm,
But because I guess it's a lot of the time, like when I'm thinking about the experiences that I've had with systems thinkers that are talking about systems thinking, it's with a tool, it's with software, it's with an app, and it's they're organizing the parts of the app, but the app, because the app can't self-organize, the app isn't an organism, but
mm,
the relationship you have with a part is, and that's where I think it's missed, which I guess comes all the way back to the start. Systems
mm,
thinking and the ecological approach. Systems thinking is about parts and wholes and the connectedness of parts and wholes, but it seems to overlook the relationship between organism and environment
mm.
because organism isn't a thing in systems thinking
No.
because systems, there are parts and there are systems, and then there
Mm,
are systems in systems. But it doesn't recognize the system as an organism because the system isn't always an organism, because systems thinking is broader than that. Because systems thinking, systems theory is everything, whereas the ecological approach assumes some systems are organisms, some systems are environments with niches. So, when looking at the ecological approach, the relationship between the organism and environment will therefore change. So, those parts in the system that you're tinkering with, there is a relationship, organism, environment, that thing. That bit there is the organization bit.
mm,
So, no, the app doesn't organize itself, but the relationship you have with each file does. So you don't need the app to do the organizing of the relationship between you and the thing because you're already doing that. And
mm,
that's where I think we end up overworking.
mm. Yeah. Yeah.
I like it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I like it too. I think.
Yeah, I this is a very sideways question. When it comes to ecological psychology and bringing it into the mainstream, we've discussed this a couple of times before. Um, I have been speaking with a couple of teachers, and a lot of the research they're talking about is, again, cognitive load theory, retrieval practice, spaced repetition, which isn't bad, it's just from traditional approaches. But when I listen to the conversations from teachers, it's embedded in the ecological approach. I'm like, do we need to do an intro there? Do we even need to bother introducing them to these words and terms if they're already doing it?
I, from my perspective, maybe because often, like I knew of, like I had this, you know, idea
Mm.
that I just didn't fully, I couldn't attune to it because I didn't have, and I couldn't see. I suppose I couldn't perceive. I don't know. Why would I have attuned to all the affordances in the environment? Probably. Would that be?
I'm not helping you.
I
I'm
know.
gonna let you
Thank you.
struggle.
Thank you. Thank you. Cheers. Cheers for all that. I knew what I experienced, which is obviously experience, ecological approach. It's kind of like my relationship with the world. I knew that because it was my lived experience, and that was the language I used to use, my lived experience. And in fact, I still use it now because it's shorter than going. um, but I wasn't attuned to the ecological approach, like all of the things it can provide and all of the almost the theoretical.
But you were attuned to it because you
But
were doing it. You
I
can't not
was
do it.
attuned, but I just wasn't confident in that attunement. That's the confident is the word that I'm finding, but it's not. I know that's not quite right. It's almost
I
awareness of it.
I would say that the lack of indirect awareness of the language
Yeah,
you could use
yeah,
is the limitation, or
yeah,
potentially was the limitation. I don't know whether that helps or hinders an explanation. I would argue it helps. That's me.
yeah, yeah. I couldn't indirectly. I didn't realize that what I was doing was actually this. I just didn't.
Or part of it anyway.
All part of it. I didn't realize that. And I think once I started to gain the language that I could then explain and discuss, it became easier almost. So, in answer to your question, do we even need to bother? Yeah. Like, yes, I think so. Because then it's like, oh, okay, so this is what I do in my class as a teacher, as someone who taught guitar. I mean, skill, whatever. But like, as someone who was teaching people a skill, if I'd known what I know now, then I would have doubled down
Mm.
instead of just feeling a little. It's kind of like we were discussing this right at the beginning. I was on this very thin ledge, like this very thin thing. I couldn't see. There was no. I was very wobbly, so I would very quickly default back to the cognitive approach, the traditional approach, because that's what I assumed it was, even though there was a piece of me that was like, yes, but caveat, 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 caveat. I didn't fully agree with what I was saying. There was stuff that didn't fit. I was hitting that ceiling, as Julie says. And so having that it's really breadth. It wouldn't be breadth or depth or like having a more rounded, direct perception of the ecological approach is just it is fundamentally just life changing because the moment you can directly perceive, it's just like just for like so much more is possible because you
Yes.
can directly perceive instead of having to try and guess and figure it out and indirectly perceive and indirectly guess and it's not guessing, it's perceive it's direct perception of something. I see something, I attune to it, I do it.
Specifying information. Come on. Get your glossary out.
Yeah, like it's not something that I have to just wait for. It's not
Mm.
passive.
Whoa. perception is an active process that we engage
Exactly.
in for action. Perception is for action. We don't just perceive in some void, just, oh yeah, I see light. Don't know why I'm seeing light, but I see light. No, you're perceiving to act, to
Mm.
live, to
Yeah.
exist. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think the way that education, the way teaching, the way educators explain their experiences is somewhat embedded within the ecological approach. However, some of the behaviors that they do, they suggest, and some of the interactions they have with students and teachers and parents and stakeholders uh, could be, I think, smoothed out. If they were to look at the constraints and affordances of the environment and address the situation ecologically rather
Mm.
than looking at other variables from Euclidean geometry or Newtonian physics. Like if you look at those lower order variables that people are perceiving, like the distance, the height, those things in traditional visual perception, but if you take that broader into social environments, oh, they they look like they're sad. Yeah, that's a surface thing. Like, what else can you see? What higher order variables are you perceiving there? Because when you look at someone's face, you might go, oh, they're happy, oh, they're sad. But there are other things that you are directly perceiving that is a higher order variable rather than just the face is like drooped or smiling. Because we know that just because you can see someone smiling, we know somehow that that smile might not be true. Well, how can we know? Lower order variables tell me like their cheeks are raised, their lips are moving out, making a smile, like lower order variables, that must be a happy person. No, we know they're not. But how do we know they're not? Because it's not quite high enough, quite low. No, we
We,
directly
we we
perceiving.
we are empathetic. We are special.
Yeah, how do you perceive empathy?
Oh no, it's you can't perceive empathy. Like it's just only magical people who are highly sensitive can see that.
I think the medium is not the message, is where I would direct my explanation there. Because what we're perceiving isn't the message. Like the
Mm.
medium itself is not the message. Us perceiving the smile, the cheeks, blah blah blah, the lower order variables, that's not the message. The message is everything between you, organism, and environment, and other organism, in this case, other person, and all of the information that you are directly perceiving. That builds up well, your direct perception of your experiences because you're not interpreting them as feeling that way. That's what you are directly perceiving. And
Yeah.
as they change, as they shift, your direct perception then shifts because that's what perception is for, action, behavior. Yeah, so when I look at the systems thinking, the ecological approach, and the battles between the two, because I think there is a bit of a battle between the two in explaining the way PKM tools work, the way that we can explain organizing information. I want to do a I want to do a hit piece. I want to rant. I'll do a video at some point, but yeah, how you reframe systems thinking, I'm still wrestling with, grappling with.
I wonder if it's the wrong question. I don't know.
What do you mean, wrong question?
I'm not sure. It just feels not pointless, but like to what end, I suppose, would be the question.
Why would I challenge systems thinking?
Yeah, yeah. Let's go with that.
Why would I challenge systems thinking? Because the assumptions that people are taking from the explanations of systems thinking actually goes against the way systems theory can be applied in the world. So it constrains the way that they're thinking rather
Mm.
than showing them affordances, which is what most of them are arguably suggesting is true because causality is non-linear. And if causality is non-linear and connectedness is within systems, then you don't need to create the connections because they already exist, which means that people could be behaving in a way that they believe is systems thinking and is beneficial to them, but actually is potentially detrimental. So the advice could be harmful without added context and nuance.
Mm. Cool.
Mic drop. Is there anything else you want to add or ask? Well, we'll close it out for this week and we'll see you next. Well, you'll hear us next week.